it that some people seem to excel regardless the obstacle, while others fold at the very first sign of a curveball thrown? In 2009, I began my own journey to discover how I could elevate my game. I was 35 at the time and had already achieved what many might consider a lifetime of successes. Yet, all of my accomplishments left me feeling short. Like, what was next? What would I challenge myself to next? Let me take you back to where it all began to change, where I shifted from what's next to finding a greater sense of peace that came from knowing myself at a deeper, more authentic level. At the time, I was serving on the board for the Foundation for Blind Children and had just attended a fundraiser where I met a PE teacher by training and an expedition leader by passion. Now, he had summited Mount Kilimanjaro 7 times and now shares his passion for the mountain by taking others to the summit over his summer breaks. That evening, our conversation quickly shifted from introductions to, hey, wouldn't it be great to take some blind students to the summit? Without thinking about where Kilimanjaro was or what the hike might entail, I said, sure. And then I got in my car that night and I thought, oh my goodness, what did I just get myself into? I don't know the first thing about hiking. Oh, but that's okay because he'll never call. Well, he called the very next day. And that conversation led to us spending the next year working with 8 blind students, each paired with 2 sighted guides, to hopefully reach the summit. Like all my other challenges to date, I'll admit, I accepted this one quite selfishly. It just sounded like a fun adventure, so why not? But little did I realize that this challenge would be the pivotal challenge that would change all others moving forward. Because you see, this is where my relationship began with Tom Hicks, a 42-year-old blind veteran. Now, Tom was married with 7 children and had lost his vision at the age of 30. He had just spent the last 12 years relearning everyday skills as well as regaining his self esteem, his self worth, and his independence, all of which he would tell you blindness took away. Together, we spent the next year learning how I could be his eyes on the mountain. Now, Tom was different than the other blind climbers of this trip. He did not want to hold on to my day pack. He was determined to conquer that mountain on his own by listening to the sound of my voice and a cowbell that was tied to the back right corner of my day pack. So, standing at the base of Kilimanjaro, our true adventure was just beginning. Back home, our lives were ordinary and balanced and fairly predictable, but here on the mountain, we were just one of many trying to survive whatever obstacles the mountain would throw out over the next 8 days and 7 nights that it would take us to get to the summit. Our journey began along Mashami Trail, which was a steep incline up the mountain. Its beauty was spectacular, something out of a fairy tale. Its 60-foot rosewood trees scaled the mountains with their great green vines canopying across, creating shade from the heat of the sun. Now, that night, we camped just above the tree level at nearly 10,000 feet. And that night also marked my very first camping experience. Oh, yes, I had never camped. I had never been in a tent. I had certainly never been without the luxury of running water and a warm shower. So that night, as the temperatures dropped to what felt like bone-chilling degrees, I began to wonder how I was going to survive on this mountain, knowing that each night would bring higher altitude and significantly cooler temperatures. So I climbed in my tent and put 2 beanies on my head, still cold, wrapped an extra fleece jacket around my head just to fall asleep. Now, our tent just happened to be staked on an ever so slight decline. So throughout the night, I would awake to what I can only describe as an ice cream brain freeze. I would find myself at the foot of the tent with nothing on my head, search for my 3 layers, rewrap my head, roll to my stomach, and kind of inchworm myself back to the top of the tent, only to do it again. Needless to say, I wasn't quite sure I liked this camping thing, but I was committed to Tom, so there was no turning back, and I had better figure out how to find comfort in what was seeming quite uncomfortable at the time. Kilimanjaro is unique in that there are 7 ecosystems on the mountain, and with each change of ecosystems brings new terrain and a new set of challenges. So, for example, day 3, our hike to Lava Tower was through this open field of boulders of varying sizes, and Tom held true to his word. He wanted to do it on his own. So, my instructions sounded a little something like this: turn right for 6 steps, 90 degrees for 6 steps, turn left 45 degrees for 4 steps, right foot up and over 6 inches. Now imagine the amount of concentration Tom had to maintain with that much instruction for nearly 6.5 solid hours, something Tom described as mental warfare. On day 5, we would face the Bronco Wall. Now, the Bronco Wall was this massive rock structure that stood between us and the summit. To reach the top, every hiker would be required to use both hands to climb up, over, and around this massive sheer rock face. And several times throughout the hike, there would be this narrow goat width trail below your feet. Now, Tom surprised us all. He moved confidently and gracefully up and around this rock. For it's as though the use of his hands gave him extra confidence and another sense of sensory. I'm quite certain that my heart beat faster than his several times that day, for I think perhaps not having sight that day actually worked in his favor because he had no idea the consequences that would face him with the slightest slip of his foot. Again, another 6-hour day of concentration, yet this one seemed to provide him an energy boost. Summit day had arrived, and at 1 a.m., with temperatures dropping below 10 degrees, we made our way to the breakfast tent. Now, breakfast was simple. It was porridge and popcorn, both said to help alleviate altitude sickness. Feeling a little nauseous myself, I settled on a couple handfuls of popcorn and then, completely bundled up like the Michelin Man with my headlight fastened, I joined the rest of our team as we set out on what would be a 7-hour hike to hopefully reach the summit before bad weather might roll in. Now, picture this: the mountain in the sky above is the blackest black you have ever seen, and the stars above are the brightest you could possibly imagine. Now, at this point in the mountain, it is so steep and the altitude is so great that with every step, you take what's called a pressure breath. So it's a regular breath in with a really deep exhale out. By 7 a.m., the sun began to glow as we reached Stella Point, which was our first rest area. You can see we were quite happy just to make it to this point. From here, we spent about an hour hiking along this wide, gradually winding path between a couple of glaciers to reach the summit sign. Now, you would think reaching the summit sign was the most amazing moment in my life, yet it wasn't. It was the moment Tom reached up and ran his fingers along those engraved words on the sign as I read them aloud. Tears rolled down his face. He turned around and he raised his hands above his head and let out just a cry of sheer joy. And in that moment, his face told the entire story of all the trials and tribulations we had faced together over the year to get us to this point. You see, seeing the mountain through my eyes was spectacular, but seeing it through Tom's is something that will be seared in my memory for a lifetime. You know, our expedition leader always said that the mountain was magical, but for me, it was life altering. From that moment on, I wanted to know that everything I did in my life made a difference. I began to evaluate everyday tasks, looking for their importance, their purpose. I learned to free myself from the limitations of fear and replace it by experiencing life just as it unfolded. You see, The mountain showed me that while I always thought I wanted more in my life, what I really wanted was for my life to stand for more. Now, with all these things deeply ingrained within me, I continue to use them in everything that I do. They have proven to be my saving grace the past few months, learning how to navigate these uncharted territory of life living in a pandemic. Like so many, I've had to adapt to my environment and find ways of comfort in what feels like a pretty uncomfortable time. You see, being grounded with purpose is only the beginning. By stating your intention or your goal, it's not enough. You must constantly make sure that your actions are aligned with your purpose in order to reach your goal line. I can say now that I honestly live a very authentic life. I still challenge myself, but in a much different way. No longer do I look for the what's next, but rather I look for what's important. What aligns with my overarching life goals? I have made the personal decision to commit to putting the care of my family and watching my son grow as my first priority. And professionally, I now help others find their life purpose and equip them with the tools to ensure that their actions are in alignment with their purpose. So today I challenge you, find your purpose, free yourself of the limitations of fear, find ways to feel comfortable in areas of your life that may feel uncomfortable so that you may be unstoppable. Thank you.